I went for a walk and a sketch today with my kids, and it got me thinking about the importance of building a visual library. But before I get into that, please make sure to stick around to the second half of the video, where I'll be sketching some Harry Potter fan art. So if you want to see my process, you'll want to catch that. And if you're interested, this here is the village of Croft on Tees, which is about 5 minutes down the road from where I live. So, building a visual library, what does that mean? Well, first, Jake Parker talked about the creative bank account in one of his videos, which I highly recommend. He talks about creativity like it's a resource that needs to be topped up, like a bank account building credit. So when you need to use it, you have the creativity ready to tap into. But a visual library is slightly different to this. Instead of building a pool of creativity credits like Jake says, which you definitely should do by the way, I'm talking about building up a catalogue of images and experiences in your mind to be used whenever you need them. It's like a reference folder in your brain full of objects, scenes and characters ready to be tapped into. Now I know the human mind isn't exactly like a computer. We don't actually have the capacity to store millions and millions of images of objects in our minds ready to be downloaded with perfect clarity whenever we please. But when I say build a visual library, what I really mean is build a habit of noticing. It's less specific or intentional than trying to memorize everything. It's a state of mind where you look at the world around you and you simply notice things. You notice the form and proportions of objects, their texture, how light reflects off them, how other objects overlap each other and get smaller in the distance, so perspective. I know this sort of stuff sounds pretty obvious, but honestly, how often do you really look at the world around you and not only look, but make a mental note of the details? I notice whenever I'm doing this, whenever I'm walking somewhere or sitting waiting for something, or out having a coffee, I catch myself looking around at the environment just how I did when I was doing my still life lessons at school. I'm trying to really notice the forms and quirks of the thing I'm looking at. It's become a real habit, and I look around at everything and I'm thinking, how would I draw that? Now you may well ask, why not just get reference images for the thing I want when I need it? And that's a good question. Firstly, building a visual library does not replace specific and intentional reference gathering. But what it does do is reduce the danger of having to rely too much on reference images. And by danger, you know what I mean. I know firsthand that it can be all too easy to just copy the references you're looking at, which sometimes isn't what you want. If you're not careful, you can find your perfect set of images and before you know it, the drawing looks a bit off. It looks a bit like a collage of generic images, which I guess it kind of is. Maybe the perspective is off of the different objects and the proportions are weird because you've collected these images separately from each other. Take for example, if you're say going to do an illustration of the inside of a tavern set in a fantasy world and it's all full of different characters. You want it to look bustling and full of life. It's a great resource to be able to pull up loads of interior shots of old pubs, film sets and other people's illustrations on the internet. But in my opinion, you have a massive head start if every time you've gone out to an old pub or a bar, you've really taken notice. How it felt to be there, the smells, the sounds and textures, the heaviness of the big wood tables, the worn fabric on the seats and the scruffy dog sleeping in the corner. How the people congregate in groups and have varied poses and gestures. Now, I understand that you're not always going to have experiences that exactly fit every illustration for you to draw from. Not everyone has access to an old pub or a castle or crooked, cobbled streets. But the beauty is, you don't have to. There's always something in your experiences and your past that can help you bring your illustration to life. I mean, I've never seen a real dragon before, and to be honest, I'm not entirely sure where I would find one. But if I was wanting to draw, say, a big dragon basking on a rock in a clearing in a forest, I'd think back to the woods I've walked in as a kid, and remember the dampness and the mossiness of the ground, how dark it gets under the canopy of the trees. Or, if you've never been to a forest, think back to the last time you saw a cat lounging in the sun. How did it stretch? Maybe a friend had a pet lizard growing up. Think back to how it lounged on the rock near the hot lamp and stretched its head up to be closer to the warmth. Now, if you're thinking, well, I've never really been anywhere interesting, or I can't think back to anything relevant, this brings me to my second point. I know all too well how easy it can be to be the artist who sits at the drawing table and works away into the wee hours of the morning. We only ever really feel productive when we're making marks on the paper or the screen. But sometimes we need to get out, we need to slow down, take a break, and take the time to really notice the world we live in. And remember, the best way to do this is passively. You're not frantically rushing around trying to absorb everything you see. It's about really noticing the things you are already looking at. You'll then notice your illustrations become a little more believable without you even really trying. And notice I said believable and not realistic. Even though my style leans towards the imaginative realism end of the scale, believability is about making objects, people, and environments look lived in. And that's about adding the little details that ground it in your world. And you do that by building up a visual library. Anyway, thanks guys so much for watching, and as always, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.